Good afternoon. Hi. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Thanks to Doug Capra for his talk. It was very enlightening. I do want to let you know if there were any questions that we didn't get answered during the session, please feel free to forward them to the museum and we'll make sure that we get those questions to these scholars and artists. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Claudia McGehee. And so she's going to share with us about her book, Wilderness, a Rockwell, Kent's Alaska-inspired picture book making adventure.
Hello, welcome back. We're just testing the equipment here. Everybody hear me all right? Yeah, let's see. Can you still hear me if I have this or not as well? I'll pick this up. I'll do that for a bit. Yeah. So I guess we can start the slides too. So thank you, Tanya, for chiming me in there. And again, for you all being here. I'm going to be presenting a slightly different look on Rockwell, Kent that I hope you'll enjoy as well. I'm here today to share about the picture book that I wrote and illustrated called My Wilderness. I kind of stole the title from Mr. Kent, but I hope he doesn't mind. Yeah. Oh, it is the PowerPoint that Kent keep right there. Just set that up here. It's all right. Get that. The room feels better. It's got a little Alaska breeze coming through, I think. There. Great. And then large screen. No, that'd be okay. Not on that side. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're in business now. Oops, except let me see if it's advancing or not. It doesn't. Is it advancing up there? No. So this is not. Yeah. Shoot. I wonder if this does. Oh, here, this does. I'll just work this. Okay. No biggie. That's all right. I think I'm good here. All right. So to get you back again into the presentation. Waiting for the web connection as well here. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's all right. Okay. So My Wilderness, the story that I began seed of an idea in 2001. I was shocked when I started to prepare for this presentation to realize it was that long ago. And I'll tell you why 2001 is so important here too. This just gives you an idea, these bullets here, of how long it does take sometimes projects to grow and finally come to full bloom. Writing and research of my project took 2001 to 2004 roughly. Like Doug, I kind of went down the rabbit hole with some of Kent's letters. It's very easy to do, and I had to pull myself back and focus a little bit, and I will tell you how that all happened too. After I wrote the book, I shopped it around to manuscript and publishers. That took a little while too. Finally accepted by a publisher in Seattle. Illustration work finally goes to the board. And then in 2015, so about 15 years later, the book was born. So in between then, I'm a very busy illustrator, but I thought I would give you a little overview of my life growing up, and always knowing that I was going to be an illustrator. I actually grew up in Vancouver, Washington, outside of Portland, Oregon. Mount Hood here is a mountain I could see from my front yard. I skied there as a child. Lots of pointy trees and beautiful mountains. The ocean is about an hour and a half away. Oops. Oh. Oh, okay. That's all right. Oh. Let's have some testing some tech here.
Okay, they got it. Thanks.
Oh, good. Great. All right. So my parents were book lovers. I was a big reader, and I was, oh no, and no, this isn't advancing. Let's see if this is. Yeah, weirdo. Why that did that? Oh, okay. So now it is. I don't know what happened there, but okay. All right. So when I was in sixth grade, a newspaper came by and took a photo of me illustrating, and this is a nice clue that I love to do what I did even when I was a small child. In fact, when I was in second grade, I made my first picture books about my cat Tibbles. And my mother would sit by the side of me and I would dictate a story, and then I would illustrate the top. And some very wise librarian said, Claudia, would you like to have these books in the library at your elementary school? And so I see the old fashioned way of checking out books. Even I checked out the books too, but my friends are there immortalized in second grade. And I knew the value of sequels even when I was in second grade. So I did about 6 or 7 of these Tibbles adventures. I never did get to Disneyland, but Tibbles did. So, and I show you these not to say, wow, what a child genius I was or anything like that. I just want to tell that if you know a child that has a passion, even when they're second grade, it could very well bloom into a vocation for life, as it did for me. I had a lot of interests, though. I loved history. I loved archaeology. And as an undergrad, that's what I did. I did archaeology mostly in the Washington State area. Here's one of the sites that I worked on that's right off of Washington State, the tippy top there. It was a beautiful McGehee indigenous site where they lived in a cave, the individuals did, and threw their garbage down the side of the hill. And that's what we were excavating, was their garbage. So I've always loved to dig. And as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, vocations kind of take a zigzag in your life. So I started out as an archaeologist, did several professional digs, but it's a very bohemian type of life. And I was very pulled to art, and I loved illustrating what we found in the digs. So I ended up getting a degree in anthropology and specializing in archaeology, but then going on to art school and doing illustration. Somewhere in between there, I did curate a small museum too. So you never know what skill set you're going to have to bring out. So my husband and I lived in the Northwest for several years, but my husband, Dan, who is a researcher at the University of Iowa into car safety, he got a job with the university, and so we moved to Iowa, where I began, I just set out my shingle to be an illustrator, a graphic designer. So again, I've mentioned before, I have a lot in common with Kent. I did a lot of work that connects me commercially to the outer world. but I also draw a lot of inspiration from nature. And with Iowa, it was just a different kind of nature than I was used to. Like I said, it was big and bold in the Northwest, and I had to embrace the big skies of Iowa and beautiful tall grass prairies I saw. Birds I'd never seen before, like cardinals. That was one of my first subjects. So when we had our daughter, I started to read a lot to her, a lot of children's books, and got interested in that genre too. In fact, I had been admiring them for a long time. As an archaeologist, one of the digs we were on, we got to stay in a high school library that had all sorts of books, and that's where we camped, was right inside the library. And it was a great summer because you could read anything you wanted to. And I started to look at some of the children's books while I was there. So I had an interest in making picture books. And when Lucy was little, just her connection with nature was so intriguing to me. And picture books really helped that. They kind of paved the way from page to pathway. If she would read something about a bobcat, she'd want to see a bobcat. So I started to think maybe this was a good way to go. I'd already had a relationship with the University of Iowa Press. It's a pretty lively press that does wonderful books, more in the mission of the Midwest. And so I approached them with the idea of doing my first picture book, which is the Tallgrass Prairie Alphabet. And since then, I've been gainfully employed as a picture book illustrator mostly for the last 10 or 15 years. Half of the books I write by myself, and the other half I illustrate for other authors and writers. How it works in the children's book genre is that a publisher will get a manuscript from a writer, and they know illustrators, they know our work, they know our styles, and they will match up. The publishers will match up an illustrator. So I will get a manuscript and it will say, hey, Claudia, take a look at this. Does this sound like something you might like to illustrate? And then I go on and say, yeah, it sounds great. I can see all these wonderful pictures in my mind already. And so we go on to make a contract from then. I wish a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I've got this great story about nature. Will you illustrate it? And most of the time I'm under contract and I just can't, but I would like to, but it does take a long time. So Scratchboard, I was saying earlier that my work and my style is very close to Rockwell Kent's black and white work, visually at least. It looks a lot like wood block, but it's an entirely different process. It's a process that is subtractive more than, you can't make a print. It's not a print making method at all. I'm going to hold this up here. So Scratchboard, my main medium, is a very thin cardboard that's the lower layer is a white clay base, and it's topped with India ink. And I take a very thin X-Acto blade and I scratch off what I want white after I transfer my drawing onto the top and leave what I want black. And I've got a few slides here that will kind of explain that a little bit better. So I start out with a simple drawing of a cardinal. Do you have cardinals here? Okay. All right. Woo-hoo. Oh boy, I fell right into that, didn't I? I should have known. So this is the top of the scratchboard before I start scratching. And I'm starting to scratch then. And I do this all traditionally on a board, an illustration board. And then at this point here, I go a little more tech and I will scan this image into Photoshop and then print it onto watercolor paper. And after that, I bring it back to my board and color it traditionally with watercolors and dyes. So let's see if this is going to load. I have yeah, it will. So this is like a 2-minute demo of the whole thing. So I'm Outline the now kind of it's on. Yeah. Should I move on?
No.
Okay. It's nice to see me resting. Usually this is like a frenetic. Yeah. You just turn it down and just let it run out. You could. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just do that. Yeah. Okay. Is back on? Okay, good, great. All right, so now we get to kind of the main event as far as the my place in the symposium, and that is about discovering Rockwell Kent's work and wanting to write about him. As many of you know, Kent admired William Blake's work, his writings and his illustrations, and this really fit me as well. Nature is imagination itself. I surely believe that. So I knew almost zero about Rockwell Kent before I started to research, before I saw his beautiful Distant Shores exhibit. But I like to show these slides here to people that are bibliophiles. And you probably already know that Kent was the man who designed and did some of these illustrations that are now, I think, a little bit changed over the years, but they're still basically used. This is the Modern Library, the Random House there, but all, and the Viking, yep, all made by Rockwell Kent. And I don't think I knew that before I started to study him. I did know his work from Moby Dick, and that's initially why I went to the Chicago Terra Museum of American Art, the traveling exhibit that came there, Distant Shores. Oh, at the Art Institute where I go to, this canvas is usually up. It's up right now, in fact. They display it. This is one of Rockwell's pieces, Mount Equinox, I believe. So during his Vermont stay. This one's an Alaska piece. I don't know the name, but that's another part of the collection at the Chicago Art Institute. But this is the cover of the catalog of the retrospective show about Rockwell Kent. How did it come here as well? Was it part of the Plattsburgh State Historic? It wasn't. I know it went all over the U.S. So I happened upon it, drawn in by Rockwell Kent's beautiful graphic pieces. But when I saw this particular father and son version, I think this one's called Wilderness. I just had to think that this was autobiographical. I looked at that, and without even knowing it, there's something about the tenderness of those figures that I wanted to know more about. And this was an accompanying piece as well. It could be pen and ink. I'm not sure if that's wood carvings or not, but I'm not sure. Pen and ink. I do a lot of eavesdropping when I'm at a art show. I love to hear children talk and comment, and I was talking with a docent somewhere in the audience earlier about how she likes to do that too. There happened to be a children's group at the time that I was viewing the exhibit, and they were at the father and son painting, and one of the teachers said, "What do you think they did on those really rainy, gloomy days?" And this little voice went back, "Well, they played old-fashioned games like checkers and chess." And at that point I thought, oh, I'm going to put that in the book. And I think, you know, sometimes you just know there's a moment when you commit to a project, and that was it for mine. Little does this anonymous child know. So I went to work reading and writing about Kent first, and obviously just reading his Wilderness gave me such a portal into his life at that time. It was interesting to hear Doug talk about looking at the letters and reading the letters of Kent. At the time that I started this project, you could only read his letters at the Smithsonian Archives on microfiche. So I was making copies and looking at this microfiche and starting to go down a rabbit hole. I mean, I decided that I didn't need to know everything about the man, especially for this particular focus that I knew I would have, just Rockwell Kent and his son on the island. So, but they were very compelling, I must admit. I did some looking around at what other people had done about Kent at this time. So I found this documentary. And about this time, I think I started to connect with the art museum here. At that time, it was Cecilia Esposito that was here, and she was so warm. I wonder if people knew her, and she's very encouraging. And talk about catalyst. I love that Eric has named this as kind of a theme of our symposium, because you can see how you write to somebody, they tell you about another name, they tell you about another name, and all of a sudden it's a big family of Kent scholars all talking and conversing, Kent admirers. Some were in there. I think I was reading, I discovered Doug Capra like Eric did, and some of his many writings that were a real guide for me as well. Like I said, Smithsonian Art Archives are a great resource for Kent's work as far as his archives go, his writing materials. I was fortunate enough to correspond with Chris Kent for a while. One of Rockwell Kent's grandsons, and he was very encouraging too. So I started really getting serious about writing the manuscript. I think if any of you are writers, you know that there's a point where you research and research and research until you're almost full and you just have to start writing. So that was my impetus to start writing, is when I just felt like I couldn't research anymore. I knew what the focus would be, but I didn't know whose voice was going to tell the story. I had I thought that Rockwell Kent had had his time to tell his story with wilderness. And I wasn't, as a children's book writer, I thought, well, maybe there's a different way to approach it outside of his perspective. And Rocky, the little boy, was somebody I had been looking at and wondering if I could pull off the first perspective. I just loved Rocky's drawings of the island and the very intimate little details. And from Wilderness, the journal, I realized that Rocky was such a observant kid. You know, he absorbed all the island attributes in his drawings. There's Catherine background. And so his voice did bubble up and finally was the dominant one in my story. So to begin in the story, and I do have, as a children's book, it's fairly long. Usually kids' books are about 60 to 300 or 400 words, and mine's a little over 1,000. So it's for an older book, an older audience of kids. But what I wanted to do, because of the perspective I took, was to begin the book as if Rocky was an older man looking back on his time on Fox Island. So this is how I started the story. Fox Island sits off the coast of Alaska, one of many islands strung through the waters like jewels in an emerald necklace. It is a rugged, wild place. Otter and seal play on its shorelines. Eagles hover high above the cliffs. No one lives on Fox Island anymore. Stormy weather and tricky ocean currents make it difficult to reach most of the year. When I was 9 years old, I lived one winter on Fox Island with my father, an old trapper named Olson, 6 blue fox, a family of Angora goats, and Squirrely. This is what happened. So from that page forward, I tell the story. And people always think it's, when they hear you're a children's book writer, they think, oh, that must be so fun and easy. But you know how hard it is to edit such a big event down to even 1,000 words. It would have been even harder at 60 words. But so I did a lot of trimming and a lot of versions of the manuscript. But I wrote it first. So I always like to write a book and finish it before the illustrations come out. I always think the illustrations are in the green room waiting. They're waiting for me to finish the words so they can come out and play. And so that's what I do first, is write the story so I can do the illustration. So with children's books, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. They're very standard size. They're usually about 32 pages. Sometimes they're a little longer now. With historical fiction and nonfiction, they can be a little longer. But as an illustrator, I get to kind of design the flow. What goes on each page is all planned out. And the first stage is making what's called thumbnails. So they're very tiny little illustrations that will plan out the book. It's like the book's map. It's so odd, though. I do these very quick little drawings, and most of the time, their spirit is so embedded in the final drawing. I'm always spooked by that. The next stage is the pencil sketches, where I get a little tighter with the details of the drawing, and then they become full-sized too, so I can start getting perspective. And then for me, the scratchboard starts, and then the final scratchboard coloring. So here's an example. Here's a thumbnail of Rocky and a goat just peeking out from the tree there, to my pencil sketch that's a little more focused, to the scratchboard, to the final illustration, and that rectangle up there, of course, is room for words. So with the fantastic story of the Kents on Fox Island, there were so many historical details that I wanted to get as accurate as possible. I didn't even know where Seward, Alaska was really. So I had to look up and get a sense first of the island. I knew that the Kents had taken a ferry from Seattle up to Alaska. I myself had not been up to that part of Alaska before, but I did get a chance, and I'll talk about that later. But while I was doing the book, I did not know what Fox Island looked like. This is a photo that I took much later. But thank goodness for Google Earth. I think it's one of the best things in the world, because I really did get a sense of Fox Island by going and just flying down and moving around that island that looks like a backwards 3 and seeing exactly where the beach was. And that was the best thing next to being there, for sure. One of the most obvious details to get right, first of all, is clothing for all the characters. So with Rocky, I did what research I could, just with photographs that I could find of him. He was usually in a proper kind of jacket, like I portray him in, with sturdy boots. Sometimes I saw him in photos wearing these overalls. There's Lars Olsen next to him with the goats. So I portrayed him in the overalls as well. Rockwell Kent, he was usually in this slouchy kind of nondescript sweatshirt. So that's how I approached him for most of the illustrations in the book. Like I said, he kind of took a second kind of a backdrop to Rocky, in my book at least, as far as visually goes. Lars Olsen, very easy and fun to draw as an older man with a hat. Small details like, what did the dory look like? I wasn't quite sure. What did a motor look like in 1918? So I kind of did those little research bombs too. I knew that I wanted to show the storm that Rocky and Rockwell Kent get into and nearly lose their life in. In fact, that was one of the first illustrations that I did. I was very drawn to that as a parent, and just as the adventure of it all, and how they survived is quite unique and I mean, amazing. Going on to other details, like what did they sleep in? How can I depict them sleeping? They may have been, Kent may have been nude. I'm not sure, but I thought, okay, for a children's picture book, I'm going to put him in long underwear. So that's what I went with of the time. Snowshoes. I knew there were some snowshoes in the back of one of the photographs that Kent had taken of the interior of his cabin. And I wanted to know more about them. So I actually connected with a museum in Alaska. Now I can't remember who, but they told me a little bit about the snowshoes that were in this photo, and I was sure to make them as accurate as I could. And there they are in my own illustration of the interior. You can see the tiny Rocky in the backdrop there. I had a real to-do and obsession with easels. I was wondering what kind of easels Rockwell Kent used on the island, and piecing it together from his journal and talking to Scott Ferris and asking Chris Kent what he thought. I put together some ideas visually of how to portray Rockwell Kent doing his work. I know he had a larger easel inside the cabin that he worked on, but I was pretty sure he had something that was a little more mobile for the outside, like his pictured. And he may have also had impromptu type easels. So that's what I showed him doing. He's working here on actually one of the father and son studies, perhaps. Here, maybe one of those smaller pieces that he did, the 12x9s that are studies as well. He even talks about, I like to put in details of in the journal when Kent would talk about the animals that he saw. I saw a weasel run by today. So I decided I'd stick a little snowy weasel in the illustration for kids to find. The cabin, I was pretty sure would not be in the illustrations as I was working it out, but I was still intrigued by what it looked like. So there's, and of course the infamous stump where he did so much chopping. I would think that that took up a good sized portion of Kent's time, is just making sure that they had enough wood. And there's the small spot illustration of his stump. I was intrigued with the goats as well that Olson kept. There's a little pencil sketch of the goat, but and sometimes as an illustrator, you have to decide whether you want to go very realistic or whimsical. And I thought, well, how do people draw goat hooves in some of my illustrations that I saw? And I looked at this person's goat hooves and I thought, well, there's nothing at all to them. So that's how I portrayed them, just kind of a little stylistic nod to the simplicity and the beauty of Angora goats. Foxes, of course, enter into the picture, Fox Island. And I'm not quite sure, I haven't done enough research, or I've forgotten the research of why. I think it was a government scheme to have foxes on the island that were raised, and I have forgotten the details, but I know they were there for a reason at some point. As when I moved to Iowa, I learned an awful lot about Alaska wildlife, and I was overjoyed to be able to do different kinds of shapes and textures and birds from cardinals that were there on the island. So I portray a lot of these. These are stellar blue jays, beautiful, really nice. Sea otter and river otter, I believe, are both there. Flounders, halibuts. I didn't realize that both of their eyes were on one side. I mean, I guess I didn't grow up with any fishermen in the family, fisher people, but I thought, and in Alaska, they're amazingly big. So porcupine, if you have read Kent's Wilderness, you'll know that porcupines come in and out of their life on the island several times. And I think Rocky was desperate to have a living pet, and they were able to capture and make pets porcupines, sometimes to the demise of the porcupine, but I knew I had to have porcupines in the book as well. No megafauna on the island. Doug Capra says that there could be instances of bears that would swim to the island, but I decided that they might be too scary for kids, so I decided not to have them in the book. But I'm still in awe of that size animal. So Squirrely was a detail of the book that I really wanted. Now, Squirrely was Rocky's stuffed animal that he dearly loved, and came along to the island. And I was obsessed with what kind of stuffed animal could it be? And I contacted a stife expert who thought that from the drawings that Rockwell Kent did, that it probably was a stife that dated to that era, or it could have been at least that famous toy maker of early or late Victorian times. And so I actually did get a stife squirrel to kind of use to do some modeling when I was creating the book. It's not as good as the one that Kent had, for sure, Rocky had. I actually asked Chris Kent if there was any way that the original Squirrely could still be around, and he laughed and said, no, I don't think so. So anyway, maybe he's out there. I would like to think that squirrel. I have my childhood pets, so my squirrelies are still there. So maybe somebody in the family has one. I hope so. There was that lovely detail of Kent bringing his flute to the island. And I wanted to put that in because, again, I wanted to fill the pages with activities that would have been accurate to what they did at night. And I could just, I'm sure it was a haunting sound to hear Kent playing the flute when he did. And from Kent's journals, you can tell that he read to Rocky quite a bit. So I just imagine Rocky falling asleep to these Robinson Crusoe stories and perhaps a flute solo every once in a while. Small details here. I asked Doug if the amanitas are on the island, and indeed they are, and I love those mushrooms, so I had to put those in the illustration as well. Devil's Club, I've experienced it. It's very toothy, and I know it will be a bane to most people that get caught up in it hiking. Little dogwoods, a lot of beautiful kelp. And actually drawing pebbles on a beach for an illustrator, it takes all day to get those done. Lots of neat jellyfish, barnacles. A lot of these images I turn into the end sheets that cap a book at the front and the back. And any kind of cameos that I wanted to show that I didn't get into the book can be put on the end sheets. So that's what I did there. Details like how to draw snowflakes. Sometimes you just run out of ideas in your head. So I use a lot of nonfiction books to help me with those small details. Sometimes I need models, and I know that Kent did this as well. So here's my husband in the morning pouring out something so I could get that hand position just right for Kent serving up a mug to Lars and Rocky at night. Here's my daughter Lucy, who I pressed into just thread your hands like this while you're in bed so I can do that for Rocky. And so she did that as well. And then there's nobody around that I myself have to model what I need. So angry pirate, I can get the expression just right. I have a lot of feline helpers in my studio. This is a cat named Fauve that used to drape herself on the cover or on the top of my illustration board. And there's her signature there, as much as she has a lot of honor for my work. And she even liked to sleep on the back of my neck while I was creating drawings. And that's my lower level studio that you see in the background there. I think Kent would be proud that I used a lot of oldie worldy type tools, drafting tools when I was working on the book. This is what the top of my illustration board might look like in the early afternoon as I'm starting to paint. A lot of times painting is the easiest thing for me. The scratch board is actually kind of physical, and it takes me a long time to kind of get over doing a scratch board versus just coloring a small piece like this at night. So it starts out all nice, but then by the end of the evening, the coffee comes out and it's kind of a messy show. But art is not always very dainty. So at the end of all that process, I have approximately 40 to 50 illustrations for the book that get whisked off to the publisher, who then turns it into a book almost magically in some ways, but it still takes a little while to get it all together. And then at that point, when the book does come out, there's the part where nobody told me that I'd be doing public speaking when I was this introverted artist, but that is a big part of promoting books and engaging kids. Some of my activities that I like to do is just have kids draw, and here I made little fox masks that they enjoyed using too. And unfortunately, while I was making the book, I was not able to go to Alaska, but a couple months later I was. So I flew from Iowa to Alaska. It's quite a ways too. It's about a 7-hour plane trip. So And I got to go to Fox Island. I took this photo because I thought, look at those huge mosquitoes. I couldn't believe how big they were. It really is true. So from Anchorage, you can take a train to Seward. So that's what my friend and I did. I have a friend, Jenny, who married an Alaska man. So I begged her to come up with me, and she did, for a grand tour of Fox Island. At this point, I contacted Doug Capra to ask if he would come and be our guide on the island. So here I am at Seward, and the first glimpses for me of Resurrection Bay. And there it is in the distance, Fox Island, which even looking at it now it kind of gets me. It's a very beautiful, emotional place. And there's my first photograph of it. And I was so relieved to know that what I'd seen on Google Maps, what I had seen in other people's photographs, transferred to what I had illustrated fairly well. And here's Doug Capra on the beach of Fox Island, about to show me where the cabin is. Just where that arrow is pointing is where the cabin was, right off of the beach into the trees a bit. It's fairly light, but if you can see the fuchsia lines, they kind of indicate where the edge of the cabin was. I think Doug is trying to find the other end of it, but there's really nothing left anymore, except the stump, which is wonderful. And that's, again, what I immortalized in this illustration here. There's a tiny little slug at the bottom too. As a child, I always loved kind of finding those secret animals. So I have a little banana slug down there. Here's the trail to the inner lake that Rockwell Kent loved so much. And then it is amazing. And through Doug's slides today too, I see that, you know, over 100 years, and you can still stand on that beach and see the same view that the Kents did. So there's a wonderful Shishi Wilderness Lodge that's on Fox Island. It's fairly unspoilt there. They're nicely done, nicely constructed cabins that you can rent through a resort, and you can stay there for a couple days, or we just stayed overnight. But I totally wanted to do that, and so we stayed there overnight. And to see the beach in the evening was just something I will never forget. It was just so quiet and peaceful. Even then, so my friend and I, we took a stroll around and a little bit of a hike up and down, but the lodge did furnish us with bear alarms. So that's a little, you have these big bullhorns or something that you're supposed to sound if you see a bear. But so that, I don't know how Rockwell Kent felt about having Rocky run around the island. I think Rocky actually was closer than I think. He was probably had this area that he explored and thought he was all by himself, but hopefully Rockwell was watching for him. But yes, bears, the presence of bears in Alaska, I get it. In fact, while I was there in Anchorage, even I was staying in Anchorage, and the morning paper showed that some woman had been making a pizza, and she made it and put it on her kitchen counter, went into the bathroom, and she came back again. This is just a house in Anchorage. A bear had got into her house and had taken the pizza. And I thought, what a story. You know, Alaskans just have the greatest bear stories there. But anyway, these beautiful rock forms. I think it's basalt. I'm not, is there a geologist in here? No. I don't know what rocks those are, but I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And Kent depicted them so beautifully in some of his illustrations. There's young Rocky, one of my favorites. So there they are. I was wondering on the island if I would feel their spirit. I was really hoping that I would. I think I did. I certainly channeled the peace that Kent found, and what Rocky did too. I just can't imagine that experience as a child at that point. And indeed, Rocky later wrote that that was one of the best times of his life. Just a beach stroll. And they are. This was an outtake from the book. Supposedly you can see the northern lights from the island, but I did not. Just kind of an afternote. Our daughter went to school at American University, and they have their museum is the Katzen Museum, and in their collection is a Rockwell Kent. So I connected with the director and begged if I could see a Rockwell Kent up close. And so this is a one in their collection. And I love it. I'll have to ask Scott Ferris later. I don't know the name of this one, but it's different because it's so central to the figures and soft in a way. I really like that one. So thanks. That is the end. And any questions? If anybody later would like to look at some of my original art, it'll be up here and perhaps at the reception as well. But there are original scratch boards from the book. Yeah, that you can see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So tempting to just say, oh, this is so perfect, I want to put it in the book. But I think I just tried to absorb his spirit, just the way. I think some of his works were a little, from the island at least, in wilderness, were a little depressed. Some of his black and white works, I mean, he was working through things, definitely, as we've heard earlier in the symposium. There was a lot going on in there. And I knew I wanted to go in the more uplifting way, with an uplifting kind of feel. I was heartened when Chris Kent remarked about the book. I sent him a copy and he said, I feel like you captured a more positive view of the island, and he was appreciative of that. So yeah, I think, yeah, going forward. Perhaps it's really hard to look back, but I think that there is something about, I think any artist that studies another artist, you can't help but absorb and admires an artist. Again, going back to the theme of Catalyst, for sure, our vocational ancestors, he's one of them for me, for sure. But I'll be thinking about that more. Yes. No, most of the time you either are an illustrator or a writer, but I would say maybe 25%. There might be more now, but yeah, I would consider my wilderness my opus at this point. I would think that I hope I have another one in me, but it was one of my favorites to do because I got to control everything. I'm just working on my 10th picture book now, and the last 3 have been written and illustrated by other people. And there's just a different feel to illustrating other people's words. I like it, but it's really, I don't know, so meaningful when the words are written as well. Oh, good. Wow. I'm glad to hear it. This is its real home for sure. Yeah. Anything else? Well, thank you for letting me share. And tomorrow I'm giving a workshop at 12:30 where we actually are going to do some scratchboard. And if anybody wants a book signed, I'll be there as well. So be happy to do that.
Thank you, Claudia. Let me give her another round of applause. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we're going to take about a 35-minute break, and then we are going to have a film showcase. And again, if anyone thinks of any questions later, there will be an opportunity at the reception this evening as well to talk with these scholars and artists about their work. Thank you. There weren't any. Okay.
If you get a parking ticket, jump, if you go out with your vehicle and there's a yellow